It started with a knock on the door that felt more like an ominous drumbeat than a friendly visit. I opened it to find Jenkins, notebook in hand, eyes gleaming with the kind of feverish intensity usually reserved for apocalyptic prophets or late-night infomercial hosts. "We need to talk," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "About Nimbus." I sighed, already knowing this conversation was heading nowhere good. "Mr. Jenkins, what now?" "The signs are everywhere," he declared, flipping open his notebook to reveal a chaotic mess of scribbles, weather maps, and what appeared to be hastily drawn arcane symbols. Localized thunderstorms, temperature anomalies, unblinking eyes that seem to pierce the veil of reality itself. Nimbus isn't just a cat, has a conduit, a harbinger. I blinked figuratively, since Nimbus never quite does at the mountain of absurdity before me. Or maybe has just a cat with a knack for causing a little chaos. But Jenkins wasn't convinced. Over the next several days, his investigation morphed from quiet curiosity into a full-blown neighborhood campaign. He set up impromptu meetings in the park, complete with handouts titled Nimbus, the weather whisperer among us. I caught snippets of his impassioned speeches the storm last week. "Not a coincidence? Nimbus was there!" Neighbors listened, some with skeptical smiles, others with furrowed brows and glances toward my house. Maggie, ever the practical one, found the whole situation both hilarious and exasperating. One afternoon, she met me at the front door, coffee in hand and a smirk playing on her lips. "You know, if Nimbus starts charging rent for all this attention, you're going to be broke." Tom, our perpetually confused next-door neighbor, lingered awkwardly nearby, glancing skyward, as if expecting Nimbus to summon lightning bolts on command. "Maybe we should just stay indoors," he muttered, rubbing his neck nervously. Meanwhile, Nimbus remained inscrutable. Perched on his usual windowsill, his unblinking green eyes fixed on the gathering storm clouds that rolled in like an ominous curtain across the suburban skyline. It was as if he was both the cause and the calm within the chaos. One evening, unable to ignore the mounting tension, I sought out Meta. Jenkins in his backyard, a veritable shrine to meteorological obsession, cluttered with rain gauges, barometers, and stacks of yellowed newspapers. "Jenkins," I began, trying to sound firm but fair, "don't you think you might be taking this a bit too far?" He looked up, eyes shining with conviction. "Far? No, my friend, I'm only just beginning to scratch the surface. Nimbus is the key to understanding the strange weather patterns we've been experiencing. If we ignore this, who knows what could happen?" I rubbed my temples, caught between frustration and a grudging fascination. Here was a man convinced that my cat was the epicenter of an unfolding suburban supernatural event. And in the middle of it all stood Nimbus, serene and enigmatic, the cat that never blinks. As rumors swirled and neighbors whispered, I found myself wondering, was Nimbus truly the architect of this chaos? Or was it all just a delightful coincidence that allowed us to laugh at the absurdity of suburban life? Either way, my quiet existence was now a stage for the strangest show I'd ever witnessed, and there was no turning back. The chapter closed on a neighborhood meeting called by Jenkins, with a crowd growing larger and more curious by the minute. I stood beside Nimbus, who remained unmoved, his green eyes fixed on me as if daring me to believe the impossible. The storm was coming not just outside, but inside the fragile order of our little community. And I was right in the eye of it all. I never thought adopting a cat would lead me here talking to myself in Latin, pacing the living room like a mad scientist, and wondering if my sanity was just another casualty of Nimbus's reign. It had started innocuously enough, a few odd breezes in the house, a sudden chill in the air, the kind that made you glance over your shoulder, half expecting a ghost. But now, with notebooks sprawled around me filled with Latin phrases I barely understood, and rituals that felt more ridiculous by the minute, I was beginning to question everything, most of all, my own mind. Nimbus, as usual, sat perched on the windowsill, his sleek black fur contrasting sharply with the pale light filtering through the curtains. His green eyes, unblinking and piercing, seemed to weigh me with ancient knowledge, or perhaps just with the eternal patience cats reserve for their humans' nonsense. I swear sometimes those eyes flickered with something like amusement. Or was that just my wary brain playing tricks? Why me? I muttered, pacing back to the kitchen table, where a half-finished Latin dictionary lay open next to a mug of cold coffee. The words swam before my eyes, a jumble of syllables that I was supposed to use in some bizarre attempt to appease the feline overlord that now ran my life. My phone buzzed, jolting me from my spiral. Maggie's name lit up the screen. I snatched it up, hopeful for a lifeline to sanity. "Hey, Maggie," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hey," she replied, voice calm, but with that unmistakable edge of sarcasm that always made me feel simultaneously understood and exasperated. "So, what's the latest?" "Nimbus casting spells now. I'm serious," I insisted, lowering my voice as if Nimbus might hear. "Last night I caught him muttering Latin under his breath. I looked it up, some kind of invocation. And the weather, the storm the other day. I'm convinced he's causing it." "Well," Maggie said, "if your cat starts levitating, call me. Until then, maybe try not to lose your mind." I laughed, though it felt hollow. Maggie's groundedness was the anchor I clung to, even as the tides of absurdity threatened to pull me under. Later that evening, emboldened by a few hours of calm, I decided to try another ritual. I cleared the kitchen table, lit a candle, and began chanting the Latin phrases I'd painstakingly pieced together. Nimbus watched from the corner, eyes unblinking, his tail flicking with what I could only interpret as disdain. As I spoke the last words, a sudden gust of wind swept through the room, scattering papers and blowing out the candle. I stood frozen, heart pounding, caught between triumph and terror. "Okay," I whispered, "you win." But did I? That night's sleep eluded me. I lay in bed staring at Nimbus, who had gracefully claimed his usual spot at the foot of the mattress. His green eyes reflected the moonlight, unblinking, inscrutable. In that silence, I realized that the line between madness and belief was thinner than I ever imagined. Was I losing my mind? Or was Nimbus truly something beyond comprehension? The absurdity of worshipping a cat who controlled the weather and spoke ancient languages was not lost on me. Yet, in some twisted way, it was the only thing that made sense. The next morning, I found myself smiling despite the chaos. Maybe embracing the madness was the only sane thing left to do. So, with a deep breath and a shaky resolve, I prepared for whatever Nimbus had next in store, because one thing was certain. Life with a cat that never blinks was never going to be normal. And honestly, I was starting to like it. But just as I was settling into this uneasy acceptance, a strange sound caught my attention, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper emanating from Nimbus, as if he were about to remind me that the story was far from over. It was one of those nights when the air in the house felt thick, like the atmosphere itself was holding its breath. I sat cross-legged on the living room floor, a fortress of open Latin dictionaries and notebooks sprawled around me like the aftermath of some academic tornado. Nimbus, as regal and inscrutable as ever, perched silently on the windowsill, his unblinking green eyes fixed on me with the kind of expression that suggested he knew exactly what I was trying to do and was thoroughly entertained by my fumbling efforts. For days I had been transcribing the strange Latin phrases Nimbus muttered in his low, almost imperceptible voice. Each phrase was a puzzle piece in a cryptic mosaic I was desperate to understand. Tonight, fueled by a mixture of caffeine and desperation, I finally managed to connect the dots. "Tempestus dominus est," I whispered cautiously, testing the phrase on my tongue. "The storm is master," or "the master of the storm." Nimbus blinked. Or rather, he didn't blink, his eyes remained fixed, unyielding. But there was a subtle shift, a twitch in his whiskers that I chose to interpret as acknowledgement. The room seemed to respond. A sudden gust of wind swept through the open window, rattling the curtains and scattering the pages of my dictionaries. The overhead light flickered, casting dancing shadows that made Nimbus's sleek black for shimmer like a dark constellation. I shivered, half from the chill, half from the thrill of what was unfolding. Was this all coincidence? Of course. But the timing was spectacular. Inspired, I decided to go all in. If Nimbus wanted worship, then worship he would have, albeit in my own awkward, suburban way. I cleared a small space on the floor and arranged a curious altar, a bowl of his favorite cat treats, a handful of incense sticks, and a small candle I borrowed from the kitchen. I even dug out an old chant I found online, cobbled together from my Latin phrase, and some cheerful YouTube tutorials on medieval rituals. Tempestus Dominus Est, I intoned, voice wobbling as I waved my hands in what I hoped looked like meaningful gestures. Nimbus observed the spectacle with an air of mild amusement, tail flicking in slow approval. At one point, he let out a low purr, which I took as a sign that I wasn't entirely off the mark. The incense smoke curled upward, carrying my hopes with it, and the candle's flickering light cast long shadows that danced along the walls. Outside, the usual suburban night sounds seemed to pause. The distant bark of a dog, the rustle of leaves, even the hum of passing cars faded into a strange quiet. Then, as if on cue, the chaotic weather anomalies that had plagued the house all week held their breath. The sudden indoor thunderstorm that had drenched my kitchen the day before was conspicuously absent tonight. The inexplicable breezes that had chilled me at odd moments had ceased. Nimbus's realm seemed momentarily stable. I exhaled, a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Had I truly communicated something to Nimbus? Or was this just another twist in the bizarre comedy that had become my life? Nimbus stretched lazily, the picture of feline indifference, but I caught a glint of something in his eyes, a spark of connection, maybe, or just amusement at my foolishness. Either way, I felt a strange surge of hope that this was a beginning rather than an end. As I blew out the candle, the smoke drifting into the ceiling, I knew one thing for sure: living with Nimbus was no longer just about surviving the chaos. It was about embracing the mystery, one absurd ritual at a time, and somewhere deep inside, I was ready for whatever came next. But what exactly did Tempestus Dominus Est mean for the storm brewing not just outside, but inside my very home? That was a question I'd be chasing for a long time to come. It started with a flicker of the lights, a subtle shift in the air that prickled at the back of my neck like the moment just before a sneeze. Nimbus, as usual, perched himself on the windowsill, his sleek black fur absorbing the fading sunlight, his green eyes wide and unblinking, glowing faintly in the dimming room. I was halfway through wiping down the kitchen counter when the first low rumble of thunder rolled through the house, not outside, mind you, but inside. I froze. The refrigerator hummed nervously. The ceiling fan slowed to a sluggish drone. Nimbus's gaze never wavered. Then came the flash, a sharp, jagged streak of lightning danced across the living room ceiling, illuminating the walls in stark white for a split second. I blinked, sure I was hallucinating, but no, the storm was happening inside my house. Nimbus. What the hell? I whispered, inching forward, the plastic spray bottle in my hand, suddenly feeling woefully inadequate. The cat didn't move, his tail flicking slowly as another rumble of thunder shook the walls. The rain started next, fat drops splattering onto the hardwood floor. The windows, the furniture, the whole living room was becoming a tempest chamber. I grabbed a nearby towel, desperately trying to shield the couch cushions from the soaking. Water pooled on the floor, and I slipped once, arms flailing like a windmill in a hurricane. Great, I muttered, now I'm a slapstick comedy act. Nimbus watched from his throne as if he were the ruler of a storm god's domain, his green eyes unblinking and commanding. Occasionally, he muttered under his breath, a string of Latin phrases that I couldn't quite catch, but which sounded like ancient incantations. It was the kind of thing that would make any sane person question their reality, but I was already well past sanity's border. "All right," I said, squelching forward, soaked socks squishing against the floorboards. "I see your little weather trick." How about you stop before my carpet turns into a swimming pool? No response, aside from a slow blink that felt more like a challenge. I realized then that negotiating with Nimbus would be like bargaining with a particularly stubborn deity, who also happened to be a cat that never blinked. I tried to reason, waving my arms in some sort of ridiculous gesture I hoped looked like a peace offering or a ritual. I'm your humble servant, your worshipper. Please, I beg you, cease the storm. Nimbus's tail flicked once more, and the thunder cracked sharply, as though he found my plea amusing. The rain intensified. I scrambled to grab towels, buckets, anything that might stem the tide. Water dripped from the ceiling fan, plopped onto the floor, and pooled near the couch legs. I'm sure I looked ridiculous, soaked to the bone, slipping and sliding, talking to a cat who seemed to be orchestrating a miniature apocalypse in my living room. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the storm abated. The thunder rolled away, the rain slowed to a mist, and the lights flickered back to their normal steady glow. Nimbus rose elegantly from the windowsill and sauntered over, brushing his sleek black fur against my soaked leg as if to say, "Well done, mortal." I sank onto the couch, soaked and exhausted, staring at the puddles reflecting the now calm ceiling. Impossible," I muttered, shaking my head. Yet beneath the frustration was a grudging admiration. Nimbus wasn't just any cat. He was a force of nature. As I sat there, shivering and dripping, I realized that the line between pet ownership and worship was becoming increasingly blurred. But maybe that was okay. After all, how many people could say their cat controlled the weather? I glanced at Nimbus, who was already settling back onto his windowsill throne, eyes fixed on the now peaceful sky outside. I couldn't help but wonder what other surprises he had in store. The indoor thunderstorm was just the beginning. Nimbus, if you were planning anything else, could you at least give me a heads up? Preferably one that doesn't involve indoor deluges. He blinked once. Or maybe it was just a trick of the light. Either way, I knew this was far from over. With a resigned sigh, I grabbed another towel and began the long task of drying out my suddenly aquatic living room. The chaos, the absurdity, and the unblinking green eyes were now a permanent part of my life. And honestly, I wasn't sure I could have it any other way. If you'd told me that worshipping a cat could involve smoke alarms and a near arson attempt, I'd have asked if you'd been sniffing the incense yourself. But here I was, knees creaking on my living room floor, surrounded by an eclectic assortment of candles, incense sticks, and a hastily drawn chalk circle that looked more like the blueprint of an ill-fated board game than anything sacred. Nimbus, my sleek black overlord, sat atop the windowsill, his glowing green eyes unblinking, watching me with what I can only describe as regal disdain. "Okay, Nimbus," I muttered, clutching the crumpled sheet of Latin phrases I'd hastily copied from the dubious internet forums of occult cat worshippers. "If you were going to control the weather, demand reverence, and mutter ancient incantations, then I'm going to at least try to play along. For the sake of peace and my own sanity." I took a deep breath, trying to summon the solemnity of a medieval monk, but instead sounded like a sleep-deprived man attempting to recite a grocery list in Latin. "A feline dominus quae tempestates regis." I stumbled over the words, waving my arms in what I hoped were ritualistic gestures, rather than a desperate attempt to swat at an invisible fly. Nimbus blinked. Or rather, he didn't blink, maintaining that eerie stare that made me question my own life choices. He flicked his tail once, with a measured grace that suggested he was simultaneously unimpressed and amused. The incense I'd lit, a suspiciously cheap lavender scent, began to billow smoke, curling in lazy spirals toward the ceiling. Suddenly, the smoke alarm erupted with a shrill, unforgiving scream that shattered the fragile solemnity of the moment.
"Son of a biscuit!"
I yelped, waving my hands frantically to clear the smoke, setting off a small wind tunnel that sent candles flickering and Nimbus looking mildly interested for the first time. Maggie, who had been sitting on the couch with a look somewhere between concern and amusement, stood up, pushing her glasses up her nose. "Are you trying to summon a storm or just a fire brigade?" she quipped dryly. I shot her a sheepish grin, holding up the incense stick like a peace offering. "I swear it's supposed to be a ritual. To appease Nimbus," I explained, gesturing toward the cat who now sat primly, completely unbothered by the chaos. "He's probably just enjoying the free entertainment," Maggie said, plopping back down with a smirk. "You know, the great and terrible Nimbus, ruler of weather and smoke alarms." As the smoke cleared and the smoke alarm finally quieted, I glanced out the window. The storm that had been brewing, dark clouds thrashing across the sky like an angry sea, had abruptly calmed. The sky was now a soft twilight blue, the air heavy but still. "Did you see that?" I whispered, eyes wide. "Nimbus, did he do that?" Maggie shrugged, but even she looked a little unsettled. "Maybe your ritual actually worked," she said, half joking, half serious. "Or maybe the storm just got bored." I wasn't so sure. The timing was too perfect, too uncanny. Later, in the softened glow of the living room, I tentatively approached Nimbus, now curled up on a cushion, his tail twitching lazily. I knelt and offered him a small bowl of milk, half spilled in my earlier panic, and a pinch of catnip. He sniffed the offerings with a dignified sniff, then, to my astonishment, blinked once. A slow, deliberate blink, the first in days. I felt a strange warmth spread through me, a fragile truce forged in the flickering candlelight and the scent of lavender incense. Maybe this wasn't just madness. Maybe, just maybe, Nimbus wanted something from me beyond worship, and maybe I wanted the same. As the night deepened, I sat back watching my enigmatic companion with a new sense of wonder. The cat that never blinks had, at least for one evening, blinked at me. And the storm outside had, at least for one evening, been silenced. Was it coincidence, magic? The random chaos of suburban life? I didn't have the answers. But one thing was certain: life with Nimbus was never going to be dull, and with that thought, I prepared myself for whatever absurdity would come next. Because if worshipping a cat involved this much chaos, I was all in. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a very strange, very hilarious journey. The doorbell rang with a sharp, insistent tone that shattered the fragile calm of a Sunday afternoon. I opened the door to find Tom, my neighbor from 2 houses down, standing there with his arms crossed, a scowl firmly planted on his face. His jacket was soaked, water dripping steadily from the sleeves onto the welcome mat, and yet, through the window behind him, the sky was unmistakably clear and sunny. "Hey," Tom said, voice low but tense. "You got to explain something. It's raining on my porch right now, and it stops the moment I step away. What the hell's going on over here?" I blinked, something I usually did far too often when Nimbus was around, though not in his presence, of course. Because he never blinked and tried to summon an answer that didn't sound like I was about to confess to summoning a localized weather anomaly. I guess Nimbus might have something to do with it," I said, gesturing vaguely toward the living room where, true to form, the sleek black cat sat perched on the windowsill, his unblinking green eyes fixed on us all like some ancient, inscrutable oracle. Nimbus seemed utterly unimpressed by the human drama unfolding beneath him. His posture was regal, his fur immaculate, despite the obvious chaos he caused. A faint breeze fluttered the curtains behind him, and I could swear the temperature dropped a degree. Tom's eyes narrowed. "You re-joking, right? Your cat controls the weather now." Before I could answer, Maggie appeared, strolling up the walkway with the casual confidence of someone who had seen one too many bizarre incidents involving Nimbus and found a way to cope with them all. She leaned against the fence, arms crossed, a half-smile playing on her lips. "Well, if Nimbus is the cause," Maggie said dryly, "I think he's overdue for a raise. I mean, controlling weather is a full-time job, and I don't see him clocking in anywhere." Tom shot her a look, but the tension eased just a bit. Maggie had a way of making the absurd seem almost reasonable, or at least bearable. I rubbed the back of my neck, feeling the familiar flush of embarrassment. "Look, I know this sounds crazy, But yes, Nimbus has been unusual. The rain, the breezes, the random temperature drops, they all seem to happen when he's around. And sometimes he mutters Latin phrases. Latin. Tom scoffed. Are you sure you're not just losing it? I'm not, I insisted, at least not entirely. Nimbus blinked once. Okay, maybe not once. He never blinked, but his gaze shifted sharply to me, as if to say, watch your tone, mortal. The neighbors murmured amongst themselves, exchanging skeptical and worried looks. The neighborhood had always been quiet, predictable. Nimbus was turning that upside down, and they weren't sure how to feel about it. Just then, a sudden gust of wind swept down the street, scattering leaves and extinguishing a candle on the porch. Everyone jumped, and nervous laughter rippled through the group. See, I said, gesturing helplessly. This is what I mean. It's like living with a tiny, unblinking storm cloud that occasionally speaks dead languages and demands weird rituals. Maggie chuckled. Weird rituals. Don't forget the incense and the chanting. You lucky Nimbus hasn't demanded a throne yet. That's next, I muttered, rubbing my eyes. I'm pretty sure he expects it. Tom shook his head, half amused, half exasperated. Well, just promise me you'll keep an eye on him before he decides to flood the neighborhood. No promises, I said, smiling despite myself, but I'll try. Nimbus, in turn, shifted his position, tail flicking with the slightest hint of satisfaction. The unblinking green eyes seemed to gleam with some inscrutable amusement, as if he found the whole suburban melodrama endlessly entertaining. As the neighbors slowly dispersed, still whispering about the strange cat and the stranger owner, I felt a mixture of relief and dread. The confrontation hadn't gone as badly as I feared, but it was a reminder that Nimbus's powers, or whatever they were no longer a private matter. I closed the door and leaned against it, exhaling deeply. Maggie clapped me on the shoulder. You're doing fine, she said. Just remember, when life gives you a weather-controlling cat, sometimes you have to laugh or you'll cry. I nodded, glancing toward Nimbus. He was perched like a dark sentinel by the window, eyes locked on me. Maybe, just maybe, I was starting to understand the strange rhythm of this new life. And as the wind whispered through the trees outside, carrying a hint of rain,